Hi, and welcome to my garden. Today we are going to be talking about how to start a brand new garden for beginners in containers. So the first thing you need when you're going to start your garden is a container. And there's lots of different containers that you can use. What I'm using today is the green stalk tiered gardening system. This is not the leaf, this is the regular garden green stalk. But you can use pots from previous plants. You can use bags from your soil. I've seen tons of people use the bags that the soil come in to grow potatoes, for example, or tomato plants. Really, there's no limit to what you can use for a container in your garden. The biggest thing to consider when you're growing in a container in your garden is the drainage holes. You want to make sure there's drainage holes, otherwise the water will accumulate in the bottom and it will cause rot to the roots of the plant. So if it doesn't have drainage holes, make sure you poke some through or drill some through. The next biggest thing about starting a garden is you need soil. I typically use an all-purpose garden soil. You can find them at any of your box stores or your nurseries for container gardening. But I also add in some black cow. So I'll do a layer of the all-purpose garden soil and then another layer of the black cow, kind of like a lasagna style. The black cow is great because it does create like a sponge-like effect that will keep the water in the container longer, because containers are known for drying out faster. So by adding the black cow, it does create like a sponge in between the all-purpose garden soil and the plants to keep some extra water in there and keep the plants from drying out too much. And then what I do is I top it all off with a layer 1 to 2 inches of the black cow to keep that moisture at the top as well. It's almost like a mulch. I do strongly encourage you to also add mulch to any of your gardens, whether it's a raised bed or a container, because it does keep the roots cooler, keeps the water in there longer. And here in Florida, keeping the roots cool and keeping the water in is a huge challenge for us. The next thing I encourage for new beginner gardeners is to start with transplants. These are small baby plants that you can get at your big box store or at a nursery, so that way you're not dealing with the challenges that germinating seeds generally come with. Seeds are great. They're just so cost effective when it comes to gardening. But if you're brand new, grab you a couple transplants. Get used to growing a plant to full size and harvesting from it before you start experimenting with seeds. Because like I said, seeds can be finicky and germinating them sometimes can be a challenge, as well as the length of time it takes from a plant to go from seed to harvest is quite a bit longer than if you start with a transplant. Now, transplants are more expensive, but they are less of a challenge and you're going to feel better about what you're producing and you're going to gain that confidence of growing a plant. When you're container gardening, like I mentioned, you do have to put drainage holes in your containers because otherwise they will cause rot if the water accumulates. But the downside of having the drainage holes and having a container in general is that they dry out much quicker. So you are going to have to water more frequently than in, say, a raised bed or an in-ground garden. So make sure that you're watering at least 2 to 3 times a week, depending on how hot it is and how much evaporation is happening. The easiest way to know when to water your plants is to stick your finger down to the first or second knuckle to feel if you come back up with any of wet dirt or kind of wetness on your fingertip. If you are experiencing that wetness, your plants have plenty of water. If you don't and it's dry and brittle, your plants are suffering and do need more watering. You also have to think about fertilizing with container gardening, or with any gardening for that matter, but especially with containers, because the dirt stays in the container and there's not biological organic material being added on a regular basis. You do have to add a decent amount of fertilizer depending on the plant's need. So a tomato plant is going to need a lot more fertilizer than, say, a lettuce plant, which only needs a little bit of nitrogen. I find fish fertilizer to be great for container gardening in general. It has great nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium levels. It comes in a liquid form so that the liquid can be applied to the dirt. Granular type fertilizers do take longer to break down into the soil for the plants to use, whereas fish fertilizer that's liquid, the plants can start soaking that up almost immediately. And being as you're starting with transplants, you really want your plants to get that nutrients faster than if you add granular fertilizer. So these were the 5 simple steps of how you, as a beginner gardener, can start a container garden. I strongly encourage you to get out there, get you a couple transplants, get you a container that works for you, and start planting today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure that you subscribe so you don't miss any of my future videos.